welcome to MusicEL Pathways, the podcast which focuses on the different pathways musicians take in order to reach their musical goals. Today we are going to be talking to another teacher over here at MusicEL so we can get to know us all a little bit better. Our guest today has had great success as a songwriter, performer and teacher, having performed, toured around the country and organised events around the world. He even owns the very studio we sit in today. And where all the MusicEL content is filmed. We have with us Cornwall's king of songwriting and the teacher of the songwriting course, Ryan Jones. How's it going, Ryan?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, right. Very polite. So, as I said at the top, we're going to have a look at a few ways in which you've grown as a musician and what you've done throughout your career. But I guess it all starts all the way back at the beginning and how music played a role in your life when you were young.
Okay, so my folks were into music in a consumer sort of way. We listened to a lot of contemporary pop that was going on at the time. And I think they were coming from a working class background and they really felt like music lessons was something that they missed out on.
Right, okay.
And as they got a bit of money behind them, they felt that they wanted their kids to experience some of the things that they'd missed out on. So like they would have liked to have learned an instrument, but they never got to do it. Yeah, they would have loved to have that opportunity, and they definitely saw that as as something that maybe the working classes from Leicester and Sheffield, where they're from, didn't get an opportunity, and that their more affluent peers did get that opportunity, and that with learning those instruments came opportunities in life, not necessarily related to music, but I think when you've got the whole package, just the tennis lessons, social, the violin lessons, the 2-1 from a red brick university, you have those pathways set out in front of you in our culture. So they wanted me to have piano lessons. I wanted to play football with my mates in the park. And unfortunately, my piano tutor's house, Miss Chapman, overlooked the park. So I used to get sent off down for my piano lessons with Miss Chapman, who had a sort of baton next to her piano that she used to whip occasionally near your fingers when your positioning wasn't right.
She was like a proper old school.
Right, yep, you're doing it wrong. And I was probably about 9 at this point. I was still in primary school, and I'd look longingly out the window whilst I was playing my major scales at my friends kicking a ball around and going, oh, why? And I used to plead with my parents saying, I don't want piano lessons, this isn't for me. But I carried on with it. I went through a few grades on the piano, and then I was let off when my school bus didn't tally up with my piano lessons for secondary school.
Oh, right, okay.
So I was then allowed to drop the piano lessons and just take on my Key Stage 3 music at secondary school. I was in a detention with a girl from, I think she was a year above, maybe 2 years above. Right. We'd done something, I don't know. It was one of those scenarios where we'd be put in detention, and it happened to be in a music room, or at least a room with a piano in it. And when the teacher left, after we had been writing out numbers from the phone book or whatever they had forced us to do at that particular time, I flipped open the lid of a piano because I was nervous of being in this room with this very cool girl from 2 years above, and I started noodling on the piano, playing a few licks, and I didn't know she knew my name, but she turned around and she went, Ryan, that's amazing. I didn't know you could play the piano. And I don't know whether I was more surprised at the fact that she knew my name or the fact that my piano playing had impressed a girl. But I made that connection from an early age.
I mean, it's a classic connection for most musicians who are boys, especially, I think.
Well, this very cool older girl likes me because I can play the piano. And I had, up until that point, thought that playing the piano with Miss Chapman, bless her, who was lovely now looking back, but it was something that my parents wanted me to do and old people taught me how to do. I didn't make the connection that very young, cool, pretty people would go, well, that's a skill. That's very impressive.
Quite impressive.
So it was implanted into the back of my mind that actually perhaps this piano skill wasn't the worst thing to have.
Yeah.
I then made friends with a a few other guys in my year who liked music, and word got around that I could play the piano and that they were looking for a guitarist. And they said, well, if you can play the piano, you could probably learn to play the guitar.
I mean, they're basically the same. They both got strings.
Strings? Yeah. They make a sound. So I went, oh yeah, I could do that. Fine. So I bought myself a guitar. I went up to, I took myself up to Plymouth, and I went to a music shop in Plymouth, and I bought a vintage, not an actual vintage guitar, but the brand vintage. The brand vintage.
Yeah.
And I bought a Marshall 15G practice amp.
Acoustic, because the acoustic guitar was not loud enough already.
No, it was an electric guitar. The vintage it was an SG copy.
Oh yeah.
And this awful sounding 15G
I know
practice amp.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was my sound. I was ready to roll.
With a 15-watt amp.
With my 15-watt amp. And we used to band practice in the school room, and we also used to go to my friend Niall's house, whose dad had a shed, which was a kind of isolation chamber for children.
Right,
we would be put in there. Yes, you can make as much noise as you like, because this is closer to our neighbours than to us. Crack on. So we used to rehearse there. And we also used to rehearse at my friend Noel's place.
So is it like the single block garage? We were always in the single block garage, or the village hall.
Yeah,
village hall a lot.
The single block garage was the vibe that Niall's place had, but Noel's dad was a professional musician, and he was a touring musician, and he couldn't think of anything better than having his son and his mates rocking out in his living room for the day. So he used to move all the sofas, set the PA system up, and it was ideal. So
I mean, to be fair, as a parent, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah,
I'd be all up for that. Like,
what you up to today? Down the bus shelter with your mates? Why don't you come into the living room and bring your electric guitars? I'd feel more comfortable.
I think that's way cooler. Like,
totally.
And actually, kind of cool for him to be involved a bit with his son. You know?
Yeah,
I think that's really nice.
Yeah,
that's really nice.
And that was the thing. Noel's kit was always the best stuff because he had his dad's old sort of Tokai copy Telecaster and all this cool old 60s kit that he had.
Yeah.
So that was the inspirational bit, and reel to reel copycats and things like that.
Nice.
So that's the process, and then we wrote songs about nonsense. We were just playing with the idea of songwriting. Nothing really meant anything. It was all just words and music at the time, or at least that's what
did
we
you
thought.
have was any of that influenced by any of your teachers, or is it quite self-driven at that point?
We had a guy called Mr. Simpson who was an English teacher,
right? And
to be honest, a lot of the music teachers at our school were very classical based.
Yeah,
and
it's kind of a sign of the times, though, wasn't
totally.
it? You know, like,
and it was almost an annoyance that this self-taught school rock band were getting the attention of the students, because hang on a minute, we've got a school orchestra that is deserved of your respect much more than these guys bashing out three chords.
I think it's changed. I think that's changed massively now.
Yeah, I agree.
As like a bonus, nice side to it. Or I think a lot of music teachers will just embrace anyone, even if they're not doing GCSE music, even if they're just a band in the school. They seem to really just embrace music making in general now, which is just awesome. I think it's such a massively good move for teachers to make.
I think music has become much more accepted as a cultural expression, songwriting in particularly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So Mr. Simpson was an English teacher, and he was one of those teachers that had always planned to do English teaching as a stopgap one summer whilst he was surfing around the North Coast,
classic Cornish,
and then ended up being trapped in the education system.
Yeah.
But he had a real soul to him, so he quite liked delving into our lyrics and understanding what we were talking about. He wasn't even our English teacher.
Oh, really?
None of us had him for an English lesson.
He was just amazing, isn't it?
He was just this old hippie dude who went, "Oh, you're in a band, cool. What? Let's hear it." And he took an interest in us. So he used to sort of coach us a little bit.
That's kind of cool, because there obviously is a massive link between lyric writing and poetry and English.
Sure.
You know, I think it's probably actually the area where most young musicians overlook Do you know what I mean? Like
Definitely.
they tend to come much more from a musical angle, and the lyrics kind of are what they are, and they get better at writing lyrics, obviously, but initially, at least, I think the lyrics tend to sit on the back burner a little bit, in my experience.
Yeah, and so that's one of the main things that I teach in songwriting is this idea of something called prosody. And prosody being, if you're talking about English language, it's to do with the accents in words.
Right, yeah.
Well, the accents within a line of words, in fact, in poetry, where you put the stresses. And in music, it's come to be understood as being a little bit more complex than that. And it's to do with the intention of your piece and every stage of your composition process relating to the intention.
Yeah.
So if you're writing about something that's sad, you choose a sad mode and some sad chords, and a melody that reflects that sadness. Or if it's more nuanced, you might have some really sad chords and modes that reflects the character's position in the world, but then you have this really optimistic melody that reflects the character's dramatic irony and his or her ignorance to the situation. And you can create an environment that underlines the emotional intention of your song in the choices. And
you see that in the great songs, don't you? You know, like the songs that last through time. They've thought beyond one part or the other, and I think it's where you I think it's quite often where the band have worked as a unit, as opposed to one person writing their part, and then smash it together in the middle.
Sure.
It's more like, you know, one person came up with a song and then each person added to it and they altered it and it molded into its final outcome. And sometimes that's a songwriter and a producer, not necessarily a band, but like more than one person working together.
I think you either understand this stuff and you contrive it, or you live it. And that one of the processes that I go through is getting people to think about their concept and their idea first, and developing their lyrics early on in that stage, and then building their chords and their harmony in prosody in relationship to those ideas. But some of the most beautiful songs that have been written by people who I doubt very much were in the headspace to make those decisions. And what they did is they got home from having a heavy mind, thinking about their world and their experiences, and they noodled on the guitar. And then some chords resonated with them. And in a very primal way, they didn't understand why those particular chord shapes and why those melodies worked, but it struck, excuse the pun, struck a chord with them as individuals. And in doing so, they were able to use it as a vehicle to express their emotional intention that they were carrying, that they were living. And it's that whole thing about keep it real, man. And you either learn it as an academic and understand it and empathize with it and use it as a tool, or you live your life and you experience things and you use the guitar or the piano or whatever instrument you're playing as an outlet to just unlock some things that are churning over inside.
And I think in neither direction is wrong. I think they're just two different angles at the same target.
Totally. And if you're going to go into the world of professional songwriting, then you can't rely on a life of pain, misery and hardship to provide you with the content for all of the writers that you might work with. You're going to have to find ways of empathizing with other people.
Especially when you do that first massive record and it goes multi-platinum and you're, you know...
I've said it all.
Absolutely rolling in cash.
Yeah. What do I say now? Well, I had this idea to write a film. Should I say this on the podcast? My film might get made. But I like the idea of a A&R executive wanting to take their artist from the big second album to the third album.
Right, yeah.
But they're living the high life now and they don't have any sadness and pain. So he pays this beautiful actress to break his heart. Like, go out there and reel him in, obliterate him. And then obviously the narrative will be about how she can't go through with it and she falls madly in love with him and he finds something in himself. But that is what the culture has become about, because we've gone from Tin Pan Alley songwriters writing with a lyricist, like Elton John's a good example, working with Bernie Taupin and Elton together, empathizing between each other's emotional intentions, with a producer bolted on, with a session band bolted on. Yeah. And so this is a really good example of prosody, that you've got a writer creating an intention, and then Elton John has empathized with Bernie's lyrics and gone, I feel it, I get what he's saying, I can express this through these chord choices and this timbre. And then a producer's come in and gone, I like what you're doing here, boys, I see where you're going. If we do it like this is going to work. Yeah. And I know these session players who are going to work really well and it's an exaggeration at every stage of the production process.
But I think that's like an interesting thing that gets overlooked sometimes, isn't it? Like accepting someone else's input and just trying it, even if it maybe doesn't stick in the end, you might come up with a much better idea beyond your own. And I think that can be a sticking point for some musicians. Some musicians have got very defined ideas of what they would like out of their piece of music, which is equally fine. But it just means that it can never reach its full potential almost, because it can only reach the potential met by one person rather than a group of.
And I think a psychologist told me this once, that it's very difficult to psychoanalyze yourself because you purposefully put barriers up to understanding what your underlying intention is.
Makes sense.
And it's the same with him, because music is a psychological process, and that you're expressing something deep down and you have an idea from your ego's point of view how you want that to come across. And if someone else comes in and says, actually, I think there's an element of irony here and that we need to take it in another direction, then that's a real knock to your ego, and you can go, no, I'm the hero in this story. Dude, you're not.
That's not the way.
And so that's why it is really useful as an artist to be able to take that step back.
Were you doing that even with that first band then? Because I know my first band, we definitely did not think that far into anything. Like there was maybe some thought somewhere, but it was much more about, we got to write a cool song.
Totally.
And that was really the outcome and goal.
Same here. Yeah. We were learning our instruments through making music. It was a very efficient and cheap alternative to getting piano or guitar lessons.
Yeah.
It was just, okay, we're going to spend 6 hours in a room together making a racket. It's going to sound dreadful, but it's going to sound better in the last hour than it did in the first hour.
Yeah.
And that's how we learn. And
so you kind of learnt like cumulatively, together. Yeah. And
there was an element of competition there as well, because at that point there were 2 songwriters in the band, and in order for there to be a process, one of us would have to turn up with a song, some chords and an idea.
Yeah.
Okay, this is how it goes, guys. And then if it was a really good song, it guaranteed that the following week that other songwriter would come back with an even better song.
Yeah.
And it was this constant arms race of a song. Oh, it was terrible. Yeah. Looking back now, the songs we were producing and recording, it was just our first songs, but it laid the foundations for understanding what the processes were and what we were trying to achieve from that. And now, funnily enough, Noel works in music education, and so do I.
Is that Noel Pryor?
Yeah.
Oh, you're in a band with Noel Pryor?
Yeah, we were right back in the early days. So anyway,
both good songwriters. There you go. Yeah. That competition worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think Noel Pryor taught me music tech, by the way. That's how I know Pryor.
Wow.
Noel, yeah.
Back in the early days.
Yeah, so I think that competition thing's a big thing though. I remember when I first started playing that I was very fresh and green to it, and there were some really good musicians in that group of musicians, and I was like, well, I need to get as good. And then it was like, well, I think I could play that better than them.
Yeah.
I think I can maybe do that. So I got to try and work really hard to get better than that. And I think sometimes you're even in competition with yourself to get better. Yeah. I've definitely had that sometimes where I've come out of a gig and I've gone, that wasn't good enough. that wasn't good enough. I need to be better than that.
Well, what you're saying about the other musicians, from that point, we became established. I think we played a school assembly first.
Was that your first ever gig?
Well, I'm pretty sure we did a school assembly in year 9 or something like that. And we were like, this is it. We have arrived. Biggest gig. Ever. I mean, if you were going to design the most difficult audience to play to, it would be a group of year 9 kids in your cohort. That is high pressure stuff.
That is pretty high pressure. Like, you've got to, after you've performed, you've got to walk out and see them all.
Yeah.
For the rest of the day, the rest of the week.
Did we nail it? And it was really saying something about who we were as individuals. And it went well. And we figured, well, we could do a proper gig now. We're ready. Straight away. And the White House in Penhallow was run by these 2 crusty old farmers. There was never anyone in there.
Yeah.
We already at year 9 age, we could go up there. We used to go up there to play pool. It wasn't too far from where we rehearsed. So we'd go up there to play pool. We said to the guys that ran the pub, how would you feel about our band doing a gig here? And they went, how many people do you think will show up to this here gig? We went, well, I don't know, 50, 60? I went, yeah, done. Brilliant. Nope. Yeah, great. Done. Brilliant. So they cleared out the downstairs basement area, which was pretty big, and we brought our practice PA in. We set up and we did a little sound check, and it was cool. And we made posters and we put them up all around our school.
Classic.
Like, this is clip art stuff. Back in 96, 97.
Printed off on a dot matrix printer.
Printed off on the school printer.
Yeah.
And everywhere. We posted everywhere for this gig. And word got round initially, Ryan and Noel and Niall and Kemba, they're doing this gig at a pub. A pub. Are we allowed to go? Yeah. We can. Apparently it's under 16s. They're out there. All right, cool, done. And I think maybe 10, 15 people were planning to go. And it went from 10 to 15 people to being the entire year group was going, and the year above, and a few of the cool kids from the year below. And it was epic. Like, the car park was full. These 2 farmer guys that were running the place were run off their feet. And we walked out. We actually we hadn't thought about how many people were going to be there, because the room that we were using as our dressing room was at the back of the room, and the stage area was at the front. And there were so many people crammed in there, we couldn't get to it. We're like, what do we do? So we ended up kind of doing this weird can across, like, trying to force our way through the crowd. And we got on stage and we did our gig. And yeah, that was it. That was when I knew that this is what I was going to do for at least the next 20 years.
That's a pretty epic, like, first proper gig.
It was cool.
Yeah.
And the difference was, I mean, you could probably have gauged it in our posture. The day that we arrived back in school, because it was Friday night, it was the Monday morning afterwards. That Monday morning, we walked through the school like conquering heroes. Shoulders back,
you
heads held
high.
All right, how's it going?
Their heads grew 4 times bigger that day.
Well, we needed to talk less and sort of gesture more, and it was all about, hi, yeah, I'm in the band. Anyway, it went on from there.
Band. Was that the name as well? Just the band.
It was called The Way.
That's pretty close.
The Way.
It's very late 90s, isn't it? I can see that. The Way. Yeah, we
were listening to like Silverchair and Herb Dog.
Don't know either of those bands.
Really obscure. The more obscure, the better. The word got round that this band had arrived in Tretheris School. Richard Lander, or was it Pan Air, had their band, which was called Itchy at the time. And there was another band in one of the Troy schools called Outcast. And
that Outcast?
No, it was a different Outcast.
Right, okay. Pre-Outcast.
Again, all these people, the guys from Itchy, Luke Toms, he went on to sign to EMI. Sean Lascelles, he is tour manager for Rudimental, I think.
All right, okay.
And yeah, there's lots of people in those bands that went on into the music industry. We arranged, we're like, well, let's see what they got, because you couldn't watch them online back in those days. So we wrote a letter to the bands of Pen Air and Richard Lander. By this point, we were coming to the end of year 11, right, halfway through year 11, and we had done lots of gigs around Cornwall at this point, taken by parents in the back of bands to go and do these gigs. And they rocked up to our school to do this. We called it Schools Out Forever. And it had the similar sort of emotional intensity and excitement as that first gig at the White House in Penhallow. And that everyone was like, well, we can't get hammered on this, but it's going to rock. And they were awesome. Outkast and Itchy were amazing.
Yeah.
Loved it. One was this sort of soul funk thing. Outkast was kind of like Beastie Boys rap with a bit of grunge thrown in there. And we were kind of grungy rock. And it worked really well. And somehow we got involved with the guys from the Hall for Cornwall, who then said, well, let's redo that gig at the Hall for Cornwall. It's just when the Hall for Cornwall had changed from County Hall to Hall for Cornwall.
Right.
And we did the Schools Out Forever gig at the Hall for Cornwall with, I think it was like 600 people there. And at the time, the capacity was quite low for Hall for Cornwall. And we were like, well, this is it. We're megastars. We've played the biggest venue in Cornwall. We've nailed it. We're done. What do we do next? And that was the end of secondary school, age 16, 17.
That is like a pretty epic beginning to a musical career, isn't it? Like, by that point, I hadn't even picked up an instrument yet. Well, so you're like,
well, you should have milked that secondary school career, because that's the point when the girls think you're the coolest. College time, they start to go, oh, he's just a bit showy offy. And actually, I value the other arts more. But at sort of that period in time, 14 to 16, that's when the girls were going, whoa, he plays the guitar. And it's downhill from there.
Yeah, that explains why I'm so showy offy. That does explain it. It all started in college, so it's a perfect analogy, really.
Yeah. So I went on from there to go to Truro College,
which was in the early 2000s. Truro College had a lot of like bands coming out of it, didn't it? And I don't know if that's still the case actually, but I know until I left there, at least at the very least, it was well known for having good bands coming out of Truro.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because that's why I went there. Like, that was my goal.
I did English, sociology, law. I didn't study music when I went to college.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah. I still played in bands, and that is why I got such poor A-level results.
Yes.
But I kind of took it on board from my parents. They were like, we get you into the music thing, but maybe you should get some A-levels behind you, and then you could consider a career in music later down the line. You're still going to do your gigs. And from my point of view, I taught myself how to play my instrument up until this point.
Yeah.
I figured, well, I don't know. I think I had such a bad experience with secondary school music at that point. I kind of felt that college would be an extension of that.
Yeah.
So I took the academic subjects, and not that music isn't academic, but I took the mainstream subjects and carried on teaching myself how to play an instrument, and then flirting with recording processes as well. I was interested in recording my own music. So it was good. Certainly the English language element gave me a really good insight into creative processes in poetry and sociology as well. I was interested in kind of anthropology and humanity and how people interact with each other. So it gave me a really good foundation for moving on from there. I finished at college and I went to study English with media at Falmouth University, and I did that for about 6 weeks. And by this point I was in another band with a really cool songwriter so there's 3 songwriters in this band now.
Is it still the same?
It was still Noel. We had a guy called Luke Toms who was playing drums at this point, who is also an incredible songwriter, and a guy called Rory Joseph who so there's me, Noel Pryor, Luke Toms and Rory Joseph, and the bass player was still Niall Tomlinson, and we were that was our band. And Rory had gone up to London to try and convince record labels that they needed to give us a record deal. And I think I did 6 weeks at Falmouth University before someone went, let's go to London and try and get a record deal. Yeah.
It's the right time for it though.
It was.
Like the band boom was bit, because I'm guessing that's like early 2000, nearly late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, it would have been 2000. I can't figure it out actually. Yeah, but about then.
I think like that band boom was massive between Oasis, sadly, and probably like 2010. Like record labels were just signing bands because they were doing so well. The indie thing was just rising up through the charts, wasn't it? And turning into something quite drastically different than just indie music. It wasn't Oasis necessarily anymore. It was a much broader category of music, wasn't it? So
sure.
So yeah, it totally makes sense that would be the time to do it.
Yeah. So that's where we went, and it didn't work out. That we didn't get that record deal, although we came close on quite a few different occasions. I think we did some Battle of the Bands, and we played some sort of showcase gigs.
Yeah.
But it's quite difficult being from Cornwall because you're competing against people who in the industry have got onto the radar a little bit.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, we were only 17, 18 at the time. And suddenly we turned up with this sort of quite quirky sound with no fan base, playing gigs on the bottom of the bill. And I just, maybe it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a tricky one in that it's a good time, but equally because it's a good time to be in a band, all of the bands are it's happening for everyone, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's like you've got more competition almost at that point.
Yeah.
Like,
so we went on from there. I came back and Luke Toms convinced me to come and audition for Truro College. And because I hadn't done the ND, the National Diploma in Music, I wasn't eligible to go on to the HND. And because I had no formal music training either, it was a little bit like, well, I don't think you'll be able to do the HND. But Paul Jennings, who was the lecturer at the time, said, you're not really what we're looking for, but we'll whip that out of you. And
sort you out.
Took me on board. And I spent all of my time in the school recording studio playing music. I'd moved out of home by this point, and I think the fact that I didn't have to pay council tax anymore was one of the main selling points for being there. So I spent all my time recording stuff in that school studio and making networks with new musicians and starting new bands and new projects. And it developed from there. It was an exciting time.
Were you in the Hitchcock rules by then?
Yeah, the Hitchcock rules started in the second year of college because I went to London again. So I was in Luke's year and I did my first year of the HND, and then another opportunity came up. I think I was asked to help with a festival. And I thought, wow, I'll drop out of college again and I'll go and do that. So I took a year off and I went up to it was definitely back in London. I think it was designing a festival called Beats Breaks Live, and I was helping with the production on that.
Right.
And I worked on that for 6 months, and then I came back and I rejoined the year below as they came up to do my second year. And that was when I met Dan Cole and Rich Mulrine, Stu, and who else? AJ Lawney. And we put this band called the Hitchcock Rules together.
Yeah.
And that was really good fun. And that was with me as the songwriter and frontman, but they were all very capable musicians.
Yeah.
Whereas, and more so than I was, I came from this background of being a bit of a blag artist, knowing some chords and a few extensions, but not really having the musical skills to carry it off.
So do you reckon that like collaborative again
it did
helped you lift up? And
they didn't have any interest at all in lyric writing or top line melodies, but they were very good players, very good rhythm players, and AJ was a great lead player, and so's Dan. So that formed this really cohesive basis, and we recorded an album within the first maybe 6 months of being at college, and we put that out, and it did really well. And then we went off on tour. It was who had the least points on their license and the cheapest insurance, and we'll put them as the main driver. We did a load of gigs around Cornwall.
Let me guess, was that the bass player?
No, it wasn't. It was the drummer, actually.
It was one or the other.
Rich was a bit older than us.
Oh, right, okay.
So he...
he managed to accumulate some more points.
Well, he had the least points.
Oh, right, okay.
And he had the cheapest insurance. So Rich became designated driver for most of our gigs. And Dan as well. Dan was only a few years younger than Rich. So those guys were in charge of driving. We would sit in the back and bounce around with the PA gear. But we did loads of gigs. And that's probably something that would be interesting to your listeners, is that gigs in 2004, 2005 were very different to the ones that are around now. That every pub had live music. That you could... Well, I've got my old diaries still from our gig bookings, and we would play from Monday through to Monday pretty much all year round, with a little gap just before Christmas and just after Christmas where it would be quiet. And the schedule would be, you would get ready for festival season from April through to May, and then you would go out on festival season from June, July, August, maybe a little bit of September, and play as many gigs in between that as well. And then you would do a bunch of local gigs from September through to November, and then a little bit of a hiatus where you'd write some music.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Because I started playing in 2005, and I started playing straight into a band, and within 3 years I'd done 100 gigs, which now I think about it is absolutely insane. But there was just like every local pub just wanted a band.
Yeah.
And all the bands were like, well, I want to play a gig. So it was just like the perfect, and they would pay you as well. Not masses, but enough to cover fuel. So it cost you nothing to go to the gig, and maybe even a bit more sometimes, depending where you got that gig. And It was just a really good scene to be in. You could go out with your mates, have a gig together, all of you get paid, have a good time, and then go home. That was the vibe. Yeah. It was a great. I just don't know where it really disappeared, but I know when I moved away, when I came back, that wasn't the case anymore. So it must have happened fairly swiftly, that changeover.
Yeah, I think it did. I think it was a pronounced transition, but it was because we had kind of established ourselves and we had a really good following and we had a couple of records out. We were playing over 100 gigs a year, and we were making 250 quid as a sort of base rate for a gig. Sometimes you get a really good gig which would pay 300-400 quid, or you'd do a ticket split.
Yeah.
And so it was a living that we put. I think we put half of that into buying new PA system or replacing drum heads or buying recording studio kit. And then the rest of it went to pay our rent. And we, I think Dan and Rich held the biggest bill for the alcohol consumption. Those boys would drink quite a lot.
Even though they were the drivers?
Well, yeah, we wouldn't drive home after a gig. No. It would be, right, we're sleeping in the van. Or find somewhere to stay.
The watering hole used to be really good for just sleeping at the watering hole.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You could sleep on the cold floor of the watering hole.
Yeah, which was horrible. Not a nice place to stay. But it was a possibility. I remember we did a New Year's there once, and it was, we stayed on the floor of the watering hole.
Class.
Not good. It was because my car got stuck in the sand. Only problems of that time. And I think they had the tractor, but the guy who drove it had gone or something.
Yeah.
He wasn't there. So yeah, my car was just stuck in the sand. I slept in the fate
of a musician at the watering hole.
Yeah. Yep.
So then we went on to going from the pub gigs and the festivals to trying to establish, and it's this really difficult jump that you make from free gigs paid for by the landlord on beer sales to ticketed events. And how do you make that transition, and how do you make it make sense to your audience who have been used to just rocking up and drinking 6 pints in order to legitimise you playing at a pub, and now they've got to turn up and they've got to shell out a fiver to get into the building.
And even a fiver can be a bit of a like...
Ooh, that's 3 pints back in 2001.
And I think it was like... I think 6 or 7 quid was pretty normal as well. I don't even think it was a fiver. I think it was normally like 6 or 7 quid. And then you're like, oh... Plus fuel on that, because in Cornwall, but there's always fuel.
Yeah.
there's always fuel on top and parking.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, I'm rocking on 20 quid here to go to a gig.
A band. Don't know if I like it that much.
Yeah.
So we started doing shows at the Princess Pavilion. That was what we thought would be we didn't just do us playing at the Princess Pavilion. We would organise what we kind of thought was the best selection of artists around Cornwall at that time, and we would curate these events. And we had Ben Howard at one of them. He was heading the acoustic stage, and we had Rory Joseph, and we had Winter Mountain, and loads of really cool bands at the time. And it was enough to band us all together, and we'd do maybe a £10 ticket price, and we'd run 2 stages, and whilst the main stage was changing, the acoustic stage would be running.
And my band in college copied this from Ryan, or Ryan might have copied it from us. Who really knows? Who can really tell? I'm going to tell you, it's probably us copying it from Ryan, because our final performance was in fact Ryan performing.
Oh, was it?
It was, and because after a few weeks ago, I said to you about I'm sure we played a gig with you, and I looked it up in my list of gigs, and it was you guys performing, and we had an acoustic stage as well with some of the guys from our school, from college, and it was us, someone else, the Sycamores.
Ah,
remember
the Sycamores?
Yeah.
Sean White, Jason White.
Yeah. I think it was the Sycamores, you guys, and us guys. And I think there was someone else as well. But there was like an acoustic stage, and Steph Newton played on that one, I think. Yeah. And someone else. We put on a show anyway. You can drink your soup. But yeah, there was it was a good show. I remember it being quite well, and but we didn't make any money on it because we charged too much money for it. Yeah.
Classic.
We did the classic. I think we charged like £10 a ticket or something along that, and that was pretty rich. So we had to play.
It made the maths easy.
Yeah, but
how much did we charge? £10 a ticket.
Yeah,
easy to work out. Then.
And we didn't, because it was like the final project. We had to like break even or something random like that. As part of the BTEC, you had to break even or make money. And because we didn't make money, we had to play another gig for the school, for Truro, to make the money back. So they took the profit from that gig.
Oh, man. And that's just so that...
And I blame Ryan for not promoting it enough, basically.
So who was I playing with?
Hitchcock Rules.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. I found it the other day.
Oh.
Thought I'd bring it up here.
Them other days.
Yeah.
So
it was
from
good.
there,
I
went on to... we just used to make stuff up. So we decided to do a schools project where we were just in that period when the festival season had finished and you're doing the local gigs. As a musician, we were earning 50 quid each a night, and we were playing 4 or 5 nights a week. So we were making...
It's okay.
Yeah. And back then, so we were making $2.50 each. And by this point, we had all moved into the same house together, and we were sharing the bills. All we did was music, so we didn't have any other hobbies, and there wasn't any other costs involved. Yeah. We were selling some records as well, which back then you'd sell a CD for £10, and we shifted a couple of thousand CDs, and that's not an insignificant amount of money.
No.
So we had cash coming in, and we had the PRS coming in, and the PPL, and we're doing all right. And we had our days free, which meant going for runs on the beach and hanging out and writing songs. But we also used to just make stuff up and go, all right, let's do a schools project where we'll get them to rebrand a band. And we were kind of flirting with the idea of Arts Council funding, going, well, wouldn't it be really cool if we got a new generation of people interested in music?
Yeah.
No, we weren't being paid for it. There was no reason for it. It was just an idea I dreamed up and went, and the guys went, no, I'm not doing anything. All right,
yeah, why not?
So we got in touch with Penryn School, and we got in touch with Branall School and with Camborne School, and said, we're going to do this thing. We're going to take the Hitchcock rules, and then we're going to pretend that they aren't the Hitchcock rules, and we want a school to rebrand them, to market a gig that they're going to do, and then to do all the business and finance behind it. So Camborne School did the graphic design and the name and the artwork. Penryn did the the media outreach stuff where they wrote the press releases and got in touch with local and national papers and did radio interviews. And Brownell School did all the finance, and they figured out how much it's going to cost and what the transport was going to be, what ticket prices had to be in order to cover the bus fare for all of these schools.
Yeah.
And by the time I had thought of the idea, we had done it. We had gone and make it happen. And we didn't get any funding. We applied for funding. We thought this is a really fundable project. Nobody paid for us to do it. Well, that's good. We'll just do it anyway. So we went in and we did this rebrand the band project. And I think Ben played on that one as well. But by this point, he was getting quite big.
I kind of vaguely remember this,
and
like I do remember this.
We did it. We launched the last record that we released called "For My Monster," and I think we had like 500 balloons up in the. We had this. The kids wanted to have this big net above the pavilion that would release all these balloons. The last song. But the guy who was the lighting technician went, we can't do that, boy. It's against health and safety. And we're like, well, we've got 500 balloons blown up now. He went, tell you what, give them here. There was a hatch above the pavilion where you can walk up there. And he must have been in his mid-60s. And he went up there dragging all of these balloons with him. And he spent the whole gig getting them set up. And he pushed 500 balloons out of a hatch over all these kids. And this confetti, and it was a really cool gig. What I'm getting at here is that the entrepreneurialism within music is so important, because I realised that if I wasn't gigging, I could be designing projects. And if I wasn't designing a project, I could be recording artists and building studios. If I wasn't doing that, I could be running events and production. So I went on to then run... I met a lady called Jane Montague who ran the Eden Sessions. And I went, Jane, why is... they're not a local band stage at the Eden Project? And she went, I don't know. I went, well, let's make one. And she went, what do you mean just make one? Give me a budget, name your price, what's your overspend on the main stage, and I'll make it happen. And she went, all right, well, I can pay you 500 quid per session to do a local band stage. And I got in touch with my mates at a company called Evo Sound who had done all of our touring and said, look, we've got 500 quid. The bands will play for free. Could you put in a decent rig and a covered stage, and it'll be a bit of a promo for you guys? All right. And then Rob Simpson, who's a PA legend, he would have been 19, 20 back then. So, I mean, he's in his late 30s now.
Yeah.
But he's quite a businessman. And he went into the Eden Project and he made a case for, well, you could put in a mediocre stage and a mediocre PA system, and we could just about scrape in the whole production for 500 quid. Or you could represent your brand by doing something more industry standard and respecting the artists. Yeah. And they went, oh, fine. So they paid him properly to put the stage right stage in. And we had so many, and that was it. The buzz, Cornwall had always felt like the Eden Project's live shows from 99 onwards was something to be proud of in Cornwall, but it really alienated the local bands. And then all of a sudden the local bands had a foundation. And again, I've spoken about Ben Howard before, but Ben Howard on at the Pavilion gig right when he was first starting out doing jam nights. I then was like, let's get him on, because I loved Ben right from the early days. I thought really liked his sound and his vibe. It got him on at the stage right stage. And the way it works is a lot of the major labels who had their major artists on the main stage wanted their smaller breaking artists to come and do something as well. And if they weren't good enough to support the main artist, they'd say, well, can you get them on your stage right stage? Yeah. So we used to have all the sub-label acts, like the breaking acts.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I saw the Kaiser Chiefs.
Oh, yeah?
There at the Eden Project.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think who was on the stage right. There was someone who got really big later on the stage right, but I can't think who it was off the top of my head. Do you know?
Well, I'm pretty sure the Hitchcock rules were the support for the Kaiser Chiefs.
You were indeed.
Because that was the...
But you were on the main stage.
We were on the main stage. Yeah. And that was the gig where I met Jane Montague.
Okay.
That's when because that was her. She was the one who kind of made that coup.
Right,
She'd gone, let's get a local band on. Who are these?
Yeah.
Find me a local band.
Right, okay.
Like quite a big time music producer. Yeah. Or like a festival producer. She went, find me a local band. Someone who played
there the next year then?
Oh, Can't remember.
When were Muse? Were they the year after that?
Honest, it's all blurs into one.
It was one of the years. I thought it was when I saw the Kaiser Chiefs. There was another, but
Muse,
maybe it might have just been the fact that you guys were playing. So it was a local band on the main stage.
There was James Morrison. He played there one year. So at this particular gig where I was supporting the Kaiser Chiefs, I'd met Jane, and she had championed local music. So she's really nice, and she was saying, "All right, let's do it. Let's get a local band stage up and running. Don't screw it up." She's that sort of person. She would trust you, but she would say, "You mess this up, you're dead."
Done.
So I know, okay, cool. Anyway, so because I was chatting with Jane, and the other side of her was the Kaiser Chiefs manager, and this guy came up to me and he said, "All right, mate, really like your gig." And I went, "Oh, thanks very much." Made sense. And he went, "Don't suppose you could get me a couple of free complimentary tickets for the Kaiser Chiefs, could you?" And I'm still like to think of myself as quite a nice guy. And I went, "I'll see. Why is that?" And he went, "Well, I've got this school that I run, and we're doing a music competition, and we wanted to make the prize some tickets to see a band." It's like, "Oh, that sounds pretty cool. Well, let me have a chat. I'll see if I can sort it out." So I went around and I spoke to Jane, who was chatting to the Kaiser Chiefs manager at the time. I said, "Look, this is a bit of a big request, but there's a school up in Cranley that is doing a competition for new musicians, and they're looking for a couple of tickets to come and see the Kaiser Chiefs, and it will be a prize for whoever wins this competition." And they're going, "Oh, sounds great. Oh, this sounds lovely. We'd love to do that. We'd love to help out. Brilliant. Let me know what the dates are and what the names are, and I'll put them down as complimentaries on the door. Sort it out." So I went back to this guy and said, "Yeah, I've sorted it. All you need to do is let me know, or let Jane know, who you want on the door, and we'll sort it as complimentary." So, "Oh, amazing, brilliant, cool. Well, thank you very much." And I was like, "No, it's no problems at all." And he went, "I don't suppose it's really cheeky of me, but I don't suppose you'd be up for coming and like judging our competition, would you?" I went, "Oh,
nothing better to do."
Yeah, exactly. I'm a musician in Cornwall doing. "Well, when is it?" "Well, it'll be." He told me the dates, and I wasn't doing anything. He said, "We could pay your fuel up there, and we'll put you up." And my girlfriend at the time was a photographer, and I said, "Well, could I bring my girlfriend?" And he said, "Oh, of course you can. You can stay with us. We'll put you up and we'll feed you, and we'll make a real big deal out of it. And then you can have a day of looking at everything that's going on, and then you can judge the competition." And they went, "Well, I could do a songwriting workshop on the day after." I said, "Oh, that'd be an amazing prize. Amazing. You could do a songwriting workshop with the runners up." Oh, done. So I go up to Cranley and I do this day of listening to all this music and these fantastic classical musicians. It was a private school, and it was a residential private school, so lots of the students were on site. Yeah. And stayed up there with my girlfriend at the time, and made it a bit of a trip, and she took loads of photos for the school to use in their publicity. And it came to the presentation with all the parents, and he said, "Well, I would like to introduce to you the manager of the Kaiser Chiefs, Ryan Jones." And I went, What? The manager of the what?" And my girlfriend looked at me and she's like, "The what?"
Just go over it.
And I went, "Thanks. The winners are..." And then I went up to him and was like, "Dude, I'm not the manager of the Kaiser Chiefs." Well, that's who they pointed out as the manager of the Kaiser Chiefs at that gig. And you got us tickets for the Kaiser Chiefs show. I was like, "Yeah, because I asked the manager of the Kaiser Chiefs if we could have some tickets." He's like, "So you're not the manager of the game?" "No." "What are you doing here?" I was like, "You asked me to come here." There's this whole breakdown in communication.
The manager for the Kaiser Chiefs for one day.
Oh, okay.
For the rest of the day, you're the manager of the Kaiser Chiefs.
So I had to do this songwriting workshop the next day. And I think he was a bit bemused at why the manager of the Kaiser Chiefs was doing a songwriting workshop.
I was going to say, why would they have done a songwriting workshop?
He just rolled with it. He must have thought, well, this guy seems pretty cool. He knows what he's talking about. He's got his tickets for a big gig, got our prize sorted, and he's speaks music language. If he wants to do a songwriting workshop with our students, brilliant. You crack on. So, that was an interesting turn of events.
That's but, every pathway,
And then later on, I was hitchhiking. I'd been to a friend of mine's. Oh, where was I? I can't remember his name. Hugo, a guy called Hugo who ran a record company called Pura Vida, and he was just a really cool guy. We used to hang out all the time, and I'd been to his place, and I wanted to go to London, and he said, "Oh, my friends Celia and Ian, who are running this new student festival, and they're getting up to London. They'll give you a lift."
Right.
Oh, brilliant, thanks, man. Sorted me out. So I hopped in with these guys, and I set off on that journey. And they were running Beach Breaks Live Festival.
Right. Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure, going back to what I said earlier, it hadn't been Beach Breaks Live that I was working on within my chronology when I took that year out. Must have been something else. But I set off not knowing these guys. And by the time we had got to London, I was the production manager for Beach Breaks Live Festival. And they're like, right, you're going to be sorting out these stages and booking the artists and working with ACM at the time, who were...
They would have been fairly smallish by that point, were they? Or are they bigger?
Oh, they were pretty established, but they were running the second stage, and I was running all of the other stages, like the acoustic stage and the new artist stage, and whatever stages they could dream up. And that was it. Me and Ian and Celia were like the Cornish contingent of the Beach Breaks Live planning department. So every time Ian would come down to Cornwall, he'd come and stay at our house, and every time there was like a local issue, he would roll me out and go and talk to these people who are objecting to our planning, or go and talk to these councillors. And we did it for about, I think, 3 years. I worked with those guys, and it's a really cool gig. And that's what got me into the idea that running events could be a career. But my point is that having that outlook and that adventurous characteristic and musical ability as well means that you don't just have to be a session player.
No.
You could be...
And I think that's a good one, in that, like, but saying yes to things can just lead to another situation, just because it might not be what you initially thought in the first place. If you go in with an open mind, it could definitely come out with something that you are super into, just from saying yes in that initial like contact. And it sounds like, from what you've been saying, like a lot of the times you've said yes to something and just gone into it full force, and that's meant that no matter what it was, you came out the other side loving what you went into, rather than just going in and being like, I guess kind of, and then muddling your way through it. It sounds like you kind of just went for it, like, as much as you could, and that brought the enjoyment out of it.
And I think the anxiety that you feel around not having a degree in that particular area or expertise is one of the biggest things that will impede you in making it work. And you're right, I did say, I think it's one of the things my lecturer said. He said, as soon as you say no to something, it's not that you won't get asked for that particular time, but it'll be the next 20 times.
Yeah, that's right.
You have to, if you get an opportunity come up in that particular area, if you're even mildly interested, say yes, and then cram. Learn how to do it, speak to people, figure out what your methodology is going to be. And the worst case scenario is that you will screw up that gig and you won't be asked again. But if you say no, you're not going to be asked again. You won't be asked again
anyway. Yeah, and I think that if you're doing like depping work or any kind of session work as well, that even if you have to say no, it's really hard, because by saying no, you know that you're not going to get asked the next time. So it unless you can justify it and the guys and you make a worthy reason why you're saying no, but it really is a like, if you can say yes as much as you can, you will be able to probably make a career out of being a musician.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put up barriers all the time, you're essentially putting a barrier up to your career.
Well, one thing that I've always had is friendship groups in all the different areas that I work, from engineering through to guitar or bass or piano. And having those people that you can say, I'm booked, but let me sort you out with this guy or that guy. And that's almost as good as saying yes to the gig.
Yes.
Because what happens is the person who needs something, you become known as a bit of a fixer. That you got a problem, give this guy a call. If he can't do it, he'll put you in touch with someone who's good enough who can make it work. And it's you'll be amazed if you're at school or college or university at the moment, look around you, and those people are going to be your default phone calls over the next 20 years when you go, I need someone in IT, or I need someone in technology, or I need another bass player.
And going back to your competition thing, when you're in school, it's a competition to get better than them or whatever it might be against them. But later on, when you get older, they become someone that you know is as good as you because they were your direct inspiration and kind of point of contact. So that quite often those guys become your next person to ask or whatever, because you know intrinsically how they play and how that compares to you if someone is looking for you.
And by default as well, if you have a bunch of successful mates, or you're successful and you've got a bunch of skilled mates, you become part of that sort of clique.
Yeah.
And not that I advocate being part of a clique, but
it's not really that though.
It's really more useful to have that respect for each other.
Yeah.
And to be able to support each other's careers as you go along.
Yeah. It's really cool. So I think we're getting near the end now, and I think there's just one more question just before we end, and that is, how does music now affect your life as an adult? We talked about basically all your growing up stages, but we're sat in your studio, so I'm pretty sure music still plays a fairly big role in your life.
So as an adult, I am really interested in helping new musicians, and I feel like I've been on quite a journey.
And I think that came through basically through your whole career. It sounds like you're kind of bringing up everyone around you.
Yeah,
so
definitely
that's still like a big theme in your life.
Sure, and that's why I've built this place, is so that it is a base for working on projects. Yeah, and that now I've got kids and a wife, and I can't live in the back of a transit van for 120 dates a year. It's another way of having that creative expression and supporting. I was going to say music, but I think it's all about supporting creative expression. Most of the musicians and the songwriters that I work with are trying to say something which is very personal to the core of their being. Yeah. And having an inspirational space that allows them to do that and allows that to be communicated with their audience it's a huge therapy to not only them but also to their audiences, and that empathy that people feel for the subject matter that musicians write about, and also as an art form that's changing. I'm not going to say it's dying, but in the way that it's being created, more people are sitting isolated in their bedrooms with a microphone and a sample pack than musicians who are getting together and playing empathetically with other players in a space and really understanding and being truthful about what they're expressing. I think that is something that I'm really interested in. Yeah, and I think that came through in the first part of your songwriting thing, is that, you were really trying to get your mind into the space of the person writing the song and almost be empathetic of their position so that you can write in a real way, not just in a, this is a love song. This is a love song. Sure. And they love someone. Yeah. The end, it's not that. It's going the one extra step to create a more well-rounded song, I guess. I think in any career, if you're a professional, if you can keep consistent and pushing yourself, that the people that I've worked with over the last 20, 30 years, they're not 30 years, 20 years, they're at the top of their game, and that there's people who are at the top of educational establishments, people who are signed to major labels, people that are working on major labels, people who are the head of production for major artists, and that pedigree of musicians that I've worked with through those years, it still reflects on me. I chose to get married and have kids and live a more sedate life in Cornwall, and especially with the whole COVID thing, it's become a lot more introspective. But I still get those phone calls, and I'm still in the address books of people that 5 or 6 years ago were going, who can I get to do that major show in London? Yeah. maybe as time goes by, because I've not been available for some stuff, I've moved down that. But I had a call a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, just before COVID, to do a multi-band shoot over 4 days from a director friend of mine. And he said, easy gig, you're just going to need to do the monitors, headphone monitors, and record the audio, and then I want you to mix and master it and sync it to video. Yeah, easy. And I, in the back of my mind, had presumed that was taking place at Falmouth University, because that's where I had worked with this guy before. And it was only 6 weeks before the show when he checked in and said, "So you all sorted for the show? You read the itinerary?" I went, and I hadn't read the itinerary. I just presumed it would be an easy gig. Yeah, 10 bands over 4 days. Just walk in a park. That's easy. It's not a rush at all. And then I looked, and the address was Miami, and I went, passport. But I mean, that's the kind of show that these guys are working on all the time. They're getting flown around the world to do major productions, and it kind of reinforced the fact that up until 10 years ago, I had been working at the top of my game with people who had continued that trajectory. And if you just keep relevant and doing good work that you believe in, and you have a cohort of people that you're working with, you'll only go up. Your trajectory will go upwards, and you might end up being a major artist who's signed to a record label at 19 and goes to the dizzying heights in 2 years. Or you might end up at 45 having built your career up to such a degree that you're running a production company. But you will get there.
And you can make a living off of your career. Like, neither one is right or wrong.
Exactly.
They're just two different paths to the same goal, really, aren't they? And I think that's pretty damn. I think that's cool. Nice. I think that's cool. But hopefully this has inspired you to become a professional musician, just like the man drinking soup over there. Drinking soup in the middle of the day. Rock and roll. So yeah, hopefully this has inspired you and you feel like going pick up your instrument, writing some songs, or going out and maybe doing something different to progress your musical career. But I think pretty much everything Ryan said there is put in place that thing we say at the end of every episode, which is every pathway leads to your goals eventually. So just take them all. And until next time, I'll see you there. Bye.